Welcome back to the show. Dana and I are. What are we doing, Dana?
Instead of being, we're aring. Dana and I are ... We're just here.
Yeah. We are really working our minds today, Dana.
Yeah.
I feel like we're really if smoke could come out of our ears, maybe it would.
It might right now. Yeah.
Yeah, the gears are
We're,
really
we're
turning.
having existential thoughts of things and splitting hairs
Mhm.
and getting the nuance of stuff, which is
We're
like,
really into the weeds. Yeah.
reminds me of psychotherapy, kind of.
Nice
How's
segue.
that a segue?
You're so good with those.
Good that I can connect any dots. Yeah.
You really can.
You know what's
That's
so
the
interesting
brilliance
is
of your
people I
mind.
talk to that are neurodiverse adults usually have like a lot of and maybe too much existential thinking, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
but it has to be prompted in some way, right? Or you're geeking out on something you're really interested in.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of like the traditional insight focused therapy, or like the
Yeah.
tell me about, you have to do the beard with Freud. Tell me about your mother.
Your mother.
Your mother. Or just the stereotype therapy you always see on TV where someone comes in and says something and they say, well, how does that make you feel? Like,
How does it
oh,
make you
just
feel?
shut up. I want to kill you is how it makes me feel.
Yeah.
But that more passive therapist just as the reflector, don't insert anything. I remember being
Blank
taught,
slate.
in one of my first classes, therapists don't give advice. And I was like, well, then what do we do? Right? Like, there's a line between giving advice and just saying, like, here's what I think you should do, versus advice that's like based on what you're getting from the client and, helping them.
Yep.
I mean, I think
Yep.
that's what they meant, like, not just saying, I'm the expert and I'm going to give you advice.
Yeah.
But with my neurodivergent clients, and you can probably have the same experience, it's not enough to just sit here and say, oh, you came in talking about, you and your husband having a fight. What was that like? How did it feel? There's not enough structure to that for a neurodiverse person. So what I usually start out with is, tell me the story of what happened. Just tell me what happened. And then usually as they're describing the fight, if you will, they said this, I said that. Then we can get into, what was that like for you? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What were you fantasizing he was experiencing when he said la 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 la, right? Well, I thought he meant this and he said he meant that, and blah blah blah. Then you get into but if it's just that overall sort of insight, we're going to sit here until something bubbles up from you and you tell me whatever comes. It's not really going to work for a neurodivergent person, because we need more of that scaffolding, right? So in that regard, I'm not quote giving advice, but I might say, me as the therapist is like a way to get you starting on the journey, right? I'm going to put your game piece on start and then we're going to roll the dice, versus, you don't even know we're going to play the game, right? I'm just going to stand there and stare at you. I can remember that for me when I first started therapy, my therapist just being, we would sit down and she wouldn't even say like, how was your week or whatever. We would just sit down and we would start staring at each other. And I'd be like, so what are we supposed to talk about? Well, what do you want to talk about? Is it a want? Is it a need to? What does she mean by want? If I tell her what I want to talk about, she can analyze. I mean, right? All the stuff they could, versus someone saying, yeah, what rises up from the week when you were thinking about starting the session today? What was the first thing that popped in your head? Even if it's just sort of those helpful leads, what feels salient this week or whatever, right? Yeah. And knowing that, especially in sort of naming affect for some clients, especially if they're still in it, are going to have a hard time articulating it, going to have a hard time naming it, putting words to it, and so on. And then depending on the age you're working with, I would imagine the younger you go, that's a bigger issue because they haven't had that level of development to do that, right?
Yep.
I see this in my neurodiverse students that my neurotypical colleagues really get annoyed by, and I'm like, "This is a neurodivergent brain." Or they'll say like, "This student, I'm asking them a question, they don't just answer the question, they go on all these little tangents." And I'm like, "Yeah, but if you notice, the tangents are all related and they do come back and then well, why can't they just answer the question?" I'm like, "Because that's not how that brain works, right?" So I'll tell clients that I'm meeting with that I do assessments with, um, I'm going to ask you some questions, structured questions as we go through this. But if you're telling me something that I know I need to capture, I'm just going to write it down. And then I may have to go back to my notes and make sure we've captured everything. And then I'm going to do an initial write up, and you can tell me if I got anything wrong or if something's missing. But I'll tell them I'm doing that because we're two neurodivergent brains. And when you're going on what someone else might label as a tangent, I know is a really good nugget, and I know
Hmm.
that they're going to relate because I also have that kind of brain, and I've over 25 years learned to capture those things. It might drive a neurotypical therapist crazy, or someone who's not treating the client as neurodivergent might be like, "Well, that why did you go off on that tangent? That had nothing to do with it." And you're like, "Oh, yes, it did." And actually,
Yeah.
the tangent is the more interesting thing. I think that's why I like psychodynamic therapy, because there's no tangents that don't have meaning, you know?
Yeah.
If you're going to sit there, do like straightforward insight focused therapy and you're just getting that blank slate reflection, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, I mean, I really find like insight oriented talk, like traditional talk therapy,
Mm,
in and of itself is not sufficient.
yeah.
And I would even go on a limb to say, in some cases, is dysregulating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so many of my clients, open-ended questions just spin them. Like
Yeah.
it just spins them for a loop. And
Hmm.
I really
Hmm.
see my job, I think, as a therapist, to be organizing. One, like
Hmm.
my job is to organize and contain the information that we're exploring together to
Yeah.
make
That's a
meaning
good way
and
to put
sense
it.
out of it so
Yeah.
that we can then connect it to an actionable thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that actionable thing could be more self compassion. Maybe
Hmm.
it could be um a reframing of the way I think about myself, which then leads to more compassion, which leads to more self-awareness, which then
Yeah.
leads to more
Yeah.
self-management, like whatever that is.
Right.
But I think, like, when I have a client that doesn't know or hasn't we haven't gotten into the rhythm or the structure of how sessions go, because I feel like
Hmm.
over time when therapists set a structure for the session, they just
Yeah.
kind of come in and they already know.
Yeah.
And so that could just be, hey, are we exploring something that's happened this week, or are we solving a problem?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
let's just
Yep.
start there.
Yep.
And I get it. Like, yeah, we were taught to be blank slates
Yeah.
that don't influence with any kind of our own bias
Yeah. Yeah.
our client's process.
Yeah.
But I have found that I think it's weird. And I understand using silence as a social prompt,
Uh,
but it's like, I'm paying you to do something, so
right. Yeah.
do it. And silence is doing something, but like that maybe not getting
Yeah.
it started. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just also
Yeah. Yeah.
socially
Yeah.
kind of strange. I don't
Yeah.
know what.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. And
Um,
by the opposite, I've had a lot of neurodivergent people tell me that straightforward CBT does
oh
not
yeah.
work here. So if
Yeah.
you just say, "Oh,
Yeah.
I can stop thinking about this one thing," and they're like, "Well, just stop thinking about it." You have A and B and
Oh,
C
I
and
didn't
blah, blah.
think about that. I didn't think
Just
about
stop
just
thinking about it.
stopping it.
Yeah.
Wow. Because I wake up and I go, let me do the hardest thing
Yeah.
for
Let me
myself.
drive
Let me
myself
choose
completely insane.
suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Huh?
Versus, okay, why might it be stuck in your brain? Let's talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And that so there seems to be this good balance between not too open-ended and not too controlling
Yeah.
enough, which I always imagine myself as a therapist, like when you go bowling and they put those
The
bumpers in
bumpers.
for
Mm-hmm.
people, I'm the bumper girl.
Me too.
I'm gonna have some impact on how you bowl, but I'm also gonna try to keep you in the sweet spot. And as you were saying those things, I'm like, oh, because I do have neurotypical clients as well. And I'm like, oh yeah, I do it really differently with them.
Mm-hmm.
They're more of the drive into their own insights, can fill the space, make the connections, versus a neurodivergent client where I'm like, let me come back to this thing you said over here that we
Yeah.
started with. Does that? And they'll be like, how did you remember that? That's why I'm here. I am doing some work, and you're supposed to be doing some
Oh,
work, and your picture has disappeared.
I literally disappeared. But
Okay.
can you hear
How
me?
how does it feel to be a disappeared person?
How does it feel to be nothing?
That would be what traditional therapy would be like. I'd come into the room and I would see that. Blank slate.
Well,
That's too funny.
good thing no one watches the YouTube for
So
my face.
imagine what that would be like, where you sit down, your therapist that's it. I did, just as you're trying to figure that out for the sake of our
Yeah.
audience. So the therapy that I did for years and years and years was more what we call psychodynamic, and then I also did body work with my therapist. And then when I moved to Seattle, I had a friend who did traditional psychoanalytic on the couch, like where you lay on the couch.
Ooh, like old school.
So I was like, oh, I'm intrigued. I should try this. And so you don't
Yeah.
just lay on the couch, but they like sit behind you. You can't see them.
Yes. Oh,
And
yeah,
so
yeah. And they're like,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I did
Yeah.
it for a while, and I'm like, just like you said, this was weird.
It's
Like,
creepy.
why isn't she saying anything? And is she taking notes? Is she paying attention? Every once in a while, she'd do what does that remind you of, or what, blah blah blah. And it wasn't for me. My friend loved it because she's not neurodivergent, and she probably just had all this free association that came up that she wouldn't have otherwise. Different strokes for different folks, right? But it was so weird for me. And then it didn't help one week that she fell asleep on me. And then the next week I asked her about it. She was so apologetic. She's like, you are absolutely right. I didn't realize I was getting sick at the time. I probably should have canceled your session. I wasn't feeling well. I'm not going to charge you for the session. And of course, in my mind, I'm like, that kind of therapy to me would be ripe for that, or the person isn't even
Wait.
seeing you. And how does this replicate life where someone's standing behind you and you're relating to this person? The whole idea is you're not relating to that person, you're relating to yourself, I think is what psychoanalysis would say. It was weird.
I'm sorry. I'm stuck on something. I can we just rewind just a moment? I am stuck on the fact that your therapist fell asleep on you.
Yeah, in that setting.
Oh.
Yeah. Probably because I was just laying there not saying
I mean, I was like, I could imagine myself falling asleep. That would be one expensive nap.
Yeah,
Is all I'm gonna say.
all I kept thinking was, this couch is so bad for my back because I have a spinal fusion. And I'm like, this is going to kill me. I can't lay here like this.
You're like,
Luckily,
do you have a lumbar support
Yeah,
or a
yeah,
bolster for the
yeah,
bottom of my knees
yeah,
to like
exactly.
prop me up?
Luckily, I said to her, that brought about a really good conversation. She said, no, I'll do traditional psychodynamic. We can sit across from each other. And then we did that. And it was, just kind of what
Much
what I
better.
needed. But yeah. So interesting because it sort of feeds into this idea of what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do have some neurodivergent clients that really thrive in insight-oriented work
Yeah,
because they are already naturally reflexive is what I should say. So they're like always reflecting and thinking about what it means. They're already there. So,
Yeah.
but just like education, we do need to kind of meet people's strengths and their
Yeah.
interests and preferences. I find that I get the most beautiful work when I can join a client in their interests. And
Yeah.
lucky for me, I share a lot of interests with my clients. And if I don't, I will pick it up. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I've picked up,
Yeah.
I will read a book, I will listen to an audio series, I will watch a movie.
Yeah.
And it gives us content to
Yeah.
connect over so that I can
Yeah.
actually work on process.
Yeah.
And that for me, so a lot of times, a parent will say, "Hey, listen, like I might have eavesdropped on your session and it just sounds like you guys are talking about Star Wars." And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"But you
Yeah.
weren't, but were you listening to thematically as talking about the
Yeah.
differences between Jedis of
Yes.
gray
Yeah.
Jedis and like this type of thing and
Yeah.
how we're picking up on the nuances and how, you
Yeah.
need to have some attachments and what does that mean and these
Exactly,
types of things."
exactly. Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
like, "Oh no, I didn't. I just thought you guys were talking about Star Wars." And so, um, but
But it's helpful to have that language, and then you can get into those nuances because you
yes.
both know that world. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
had a client say to me, "I don't know what a mother figure is." Because we were
Mm.
kind of talking about a mother, his relationship with his mom
Mhm.
and what that means and what that's meant to him
Yeah.
in his own development. And he's like, "I don't even know what you mean."
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we really talked about Anakin and Shmi.
Yeah.
I think I said her name right. And she was like, "Oh," and like
Yeah.
how the trauma for her and how like that kind of just was in his dreams, like
Yeah.
when he was,
Yeah.
had dark, the dark, the dark side kind of enter. We
Yeah.
started being
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
premonition,
Yeah.
and
And these are
like
archetypes, right? I mean, Jung talked about it's helpful to
archetypes.
have shared archetypes and you can
Yeah.
both speak the same language. It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just find like you really have to, I always say, like, I have to create a Rosetta Stone for every single client. I
Yeah.
mean, that looks different for every client, but I just see like when I stay open-ended, most of the time, I think as a general rule,
Mhm.
I probably look more directive and more structured as a
Yeah.
therapist than
Yeah.
more open.
Yeah.
And I just find that whenever I am open, too open, and I ask
Mhm.
open-ended questions, it really distresses my clients, really dysregulates them.
And you're probably at this point though, if you do that, you can tell when they're like, "What the hell?" And then
Oh,
you
yeah,
can add to it and be
and I
like, "Well, let
reflect
me."
it.
Yeah, yeah.
I
That
take
makes
ownership
sense.
of
Be
it.
open-ended. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
"Oh,
yeah.
my bad. That was probably
Yeah.
that question did not feel good. Okay, let me," and I might even work with them, like, if I asked a more concrete question, would that help? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
at least
yeah,
I'm empowering them to kind of understand why they're getting
yeah.
distressed, but it's a constant and that changes all the time. Like I don't really, I mean, every session is so different in many ways because of where my client is and their
Mhm.
capacity for it. And
Mhm.
some clients just don't tolerate our therapeutic presses and challenges well, and so I have to really titrate those over
Yep,
time. And so
yep.
it's a I think that it keeps us on it's a very dynamic place to be as a therapist.
Yeah.
Um,
And also, I've brought up the stat before that it takes there's an average of 3 to 5 therapists someone has to try before they find one that is a good fit,
mm,
which is and as you're talking about this, I'm like, "Oh, now I can see." I used to think it was a really terrible stat, like, what are people doing that it
mhm.
takes that? But I do think the fit is so much about these sort of variables. It's not just your personality, the personality of your therapist, but also, like you said, do we speak the same language? Can I pick up
Mhm.
your language? Do I understand you? Does that person feel seen and heard and so on? Do they
Yeah.
feel like it's all one-way flow? Because sometimes that can feel yucky too, like I'm not seeing any of you. And so for me, I do
Totally.
self-disclose certain things just as a way of like, yes, I'm
Yeah.
human, I'm here. And it's usually something we share in common. Like, is this for the
Yeah.
client or is it just for me? If it's just for me, that's the rule. I don't bring it up. But if
Yeah.
it's like, yes, I get it, this thing, or yeah, when I really got into the Moon Knight, that was a recommendation from a client of mine who was getting all these meanings from these various episodes. And I'm like, I got to check this out. And
Yeah.
it did. It was really good fodder for a lot of things that we were talking about. So that's great
Yeah.
to have those shared experiences, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that that leads to a comfort or like a comfortability in the
Mhm.
session and that the session does need to feel safe and comfortable in order
Yeah,
for us to explore some difficult pieces.
that's right.
I find that even sometimes in therapy, I need to spend a lot of time in validation
Yeah.
initially. And it's because I've got a client who's either been chronically masking
Mhm.
or has had chronic shame.
Mhm.
And that can be self That can be
Sure.
self.
Yes, it's been
Um,
internalized at that point.
yeah,
Yeah.
I have clients that are like, look, I know that I grew up in a very supportive,
Mm.
engaging, encouraging, accepting, non-judgmental home. But my mind
Uh,
is
yeah.
extremely self-critical. Like
Mm.
that is the way my mind works.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we get under that. But when you're doing that and you're coming to me because you're burned out at 28
Oh
and
god,
that's been
yeah.
happening, right?
Yeah.
It's going to take a moment for us
That's right.
to just kind of really get our bearings again and really kind of really validate some experiences
Yeah.
here, and
Exactly.
really kind of evaluate self narratives. But
Yeah, sure.
I would say in general, though, like open ended,
Yep.
traditional, insight oriented talk therapy is just, it's either not enough
Yep.
or it's really dysregulating.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think this is what leads to a lot of people failing out of therapy and then feeling like they're the broken ones,
Yeah,
not
'cause
that the fit wasn't
yeah,
good or the
yeah, the
therapist wasn't good.
dysregulation makes it worse, and you're like, "What the hell? Why am I leaving here more undone?" Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You should not leave a session. I'm just going to say, you should
Mhm.
never leave a session more undone. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that you would never leave a session feeling raw or tired
Yeah,
from what you
yeah,
did,
yeah,
but you should not be more dysregulated than when you walked in that door.
yeah. Good therapist will give you closure time before that. That's the
Yes.
part of our
Yes.
job. Yep,
It is
yep,
our job to contain
yep.
and pace
Yes,
and load demands
yep,
properly. That is our job.
yep,
So that's a good red flag. We should do a red flag
yeah.
when therapy,
Ooh,
like when you should quit, like when
yeah,
you should
yeah,
like not see a therapist
yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
Ooh, Dana, write that down before we
Yeah,
forget in 2
I will,
minutes.
yeah, and if they're not remembering that, if they're not aware of that, like, I'll tell clients that I do assessments for when we're just an hour of just pure history. When we get off, online together, I'll say, "You told me a lot about
Yeah.
yourself, that you maybe haven't talked about all at one time to someone you've never met. You might
Yep.
feel a little dysregulated this week, and it's totally normal, and so
Yep.
rely on your coping strategies." And I could see someone not doing that and just being like, "Okay, see you next week," and then they're like, "What the hell just happened?" So yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So
If we are going to push Humpty off the ledge, we should probably we should probably put Humpty back together again.
right, right, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Therapy is a very difficult place to be, and it does take a lot of courage to
yeah.
come into therapeutic work. And so I have a lot of, for those of us that have been in our own and are in our own therapeutic work,
Mhm.
it's not a place
Hard.
for the weak, which is
Yeah.
why it really makes me crazy when people are like, "Oh, you were vulnerable in front of people. Why do you
Mm.
have to be weak?" I'm like, that is actually really brave and
Strength. Yeah,
courageous
people
to
that go
be.
through therapy and really deal with their stuff are very strong. It's
Yeah.
easy to never deal with stuff. That's the easy way out. It's hard to deal with
Yeah.
it.
It is
Takes a lot of
harder to,
work.
and then deal with it like in public. Like I think about Simone
Exactly.
Biles like right away, like,
Oh,
where
yeah,
she came under
yeah,
so much scrutiny for coming out
yeah.
and bowing out of the team and because
Yep.
she was, and I was like, that's not her being weak. That's her being very, very courageous to say
Very
like,
hard to do
I
that.
can't
That's
help my
exactly right.
team. I can't do that right now. I need to
Yep,
take care of myself right now. Like,
that's right.
so,
Exactly.
anyway,
Yeah.
awesome. All right, everyone. Well, be good to you. And, if you're in therapy and it's not working, maybe it's not you.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm breaking up. It's
Right.
not you, it's me.
It's
But
not always
actually,
necessarily you.
it's
Yeah.
you.
It's
So,
yeah. Yeah, it could be the therapist. We're not perfect and there's some bad ones out
no.
there. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's maybe not a good fit.
Yeah, and
I
it's not a
know,
good fit.
like,
Yeah,
there are some therapies that I could not do.
exactly. Yeah,
And
I
there are
couldn't sit
some
behind someone
populations
laying
that
on
I
a couch.
cannot
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
So
Yeah, 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 you need to know your limits. Yeah,
we need to know our limits and we need to
yeah.
know like what works and where we work our best. But anyway, all right, everyone, we will catch you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye, everybody.